Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International Interprofessional Mentorship Meeting. I am Dr. Kate Barlow, the founder and host for today's meeting. It's November 12th, 2021, and today Reena Singh, an occupational therapist from India, is here to talk about reflex integration. Please mute yourselves during the presentation and unmute yourself whenever you would like to ask a question. You can also type your question into the chat box, and I will ask the questions for you. In order to receive a certificate of attendance, you will need to remain on until the presenter has finished. Please enter your name and email into the chat box now, and you will receive a certificate of attendance within a couple weeks. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will have an optional meet and greet. Thank you all for coming, and let's get started. Thank you, Reena, so much for joining us today.
I'm honored, Kate. Thank you for having me here. So we're going to talk about primitive reflexes, and that's the topic which is my, it's a topic that I just love. I remember when I was in college, and I'm sure, Kate, even you, we all studied about primitive reflexes and, normal child development and all, and I was really fascinated by that whole topic. And I used to tell my teachers and professors that I'm going to do more of this, and they used to say, it's only used for kids who have cerebral palsy or, motor milestone delay. So that's all that they told me. But then when I started working, I did work initially with a few kids who had cerebral palsy and motor milestone delays, but I didn't find it really, really challenging. And I started working with kids with autism, and that's where I found what I really wanted to do. And when I started working with kids with autism, that's initially I only used sensory integration as a frame of reference. And as I learned more, I was introduced to primitive reflexes by this, special educator called Sally Goddard. Sally Goddard and Peter Blythe, both of them were, Peter Blythe is no longer there, but Sally Goddard's book, Reflexes, Learning and Behavior, was the first book that I took up, and I started reading about each and every reflex in details. And when I read it, I remember getting the book and I'd finished reading it the next day, like the full night I read it. It was like, I loved them. I loved the reflexes so much. And then I started using the INPP protocol for kids, and I understood the depth and the amount of what I would say impact that these primitive reflexes have, not just on children with autism, but even on people like me. When I went for my trainings, I realized I had an active Moro reflex and a spinal gallant reflex and tonic labyrinthine reflex, which were present, and I was like, like when my instructor said anybody wants to come up in the front and be a volunteer, and I was like, yeah, I am all integrated and perfect, and I'm kind of going to go. And she said, oh, this is present. I'm like, what? That's also present. I'm like, what are you saying? I am not integrated. I am a therapist. I thought occupational therapist, meaning I know everything and I'm like the best. And that's when I really started, because I always thought that this is who I am, but I learned that this is not who I am. It is because I have some difficulty. I'm adjusting, I'm adapting, I'm coping, So what are these primitive reflexes and why are they so important? All of us, when we were in a mother's womb and when the foundations of our brain were being, laid down, there were these little primitive reflexes which were, there were intrauterine reflexes rather, which were there, and they were needed to be present so that the development of our neural structures would happen. The first reflex that at around 5th week of conception that emerges is the fear paralysis reflex, which is an intrauterine reflex. It's not even a primitive reflex. And from 5th week till around, I say 12th, 13th week, it is kind of, it is at its peak by 12th or 13th week, and that's when this fear paralysis reflex starts getting transformed into Moro reflex. So what I'm trying to convey, why I'm talking about fear paralysis and moro reflexes? Because primitive reflexes are like the primary motor patterns that are there in our body, which are very important, and they help in laying the foundations for our neurological processes. You know, movement is the key of life. I mean, you know, there are so many. There's this, I don't remember very clearly, but I remember in this book, Beyond the Sea Squirt. Sea squirt is an animal or a whatever, you know, it's a little thing which eats up its brain after it attaches itself to the ground, because the main function of our brain is to be able to coordinate our movement patterns, you know. So primitive reflexes are like those key movement patterns which a baby, when a baby is born, a full term 40 week, you know, when a baby is born, he or she would have those primitive reflexes, and they are important to be there, do the work, you know, of helping the baby to survive and to protect. If you can see this slide, this is a palmar grasp reflex. Whenever we put our finger in the hand of a baby, the baby holds on. It's a reflex. And if you pull your hand, you know, the baby has, the grasp reflex is so strong that the baby can be suspended, you know, it's like that very strong in the initial part of when the baby is born, just born. So the reflexes, they are there when the system is emerging, the neurological system is emerging, it is developing. And once the function is established and the higher connections, you know, to the brain are established, then these primitive reflexes get integrated, or they stay dormant, you know, they are in our system but they stay dormant. So that's what the primitive reflexes are. So let me see, you know what, when I do this, I'm not able to share my screen, I'm not able to see my own screen. Something here, give me a minute. Oops, it's happening. Now, why are primitive reflexes important? As I mentioned already, in this picture, I mean, if there's anyone who would like to explain what reflex would we see in the feet? What are the reflexes? You can just type in the chat box. Which are the reflexes that we would see in the, yeah. So Kate, I can't see the chat for some reason. I can just see my own screen.
So far we have the Moro has been typed in.
Okay. So my question is, in the feet, what is this reflex that we see and why is it important? You know, when a baby is very little, just learning to walk, at that time, if you see in this little baby's feet, the arches haven't developed, you know, the medial arch hasn't developed. And if you see, the foot is all curled up, that's the plantar grasp reflex, you know. You have an infant plantar grasp reflex and then that develops into an adult plantar grasp reflex. And the very, very strong reflex that we see in the feet of most kids that I work with, most of them, is the foot tendon guard and the Babinski. They're very, very, very strongly present. So why are they very important? Because, as I mentioned, primitive reflexes are about the nervous system which is mature at the brainstem level, and as the connections are established to the higher centers from primitive reflexes, you know, first it was that intrauterine reflex, like, you know, the fear paralysis reflex, then comes the primitive reflex, and once the primitive reflexes get integrated, we get postural, basically the equilibrium and the righting reactions. So, you know, system gets developed and developed and developed, and so the role of these primitive reflexes becomes redundant as the higher level postural reflexes emerge. Yeah, so they're very important only in the initial years. Most of the primitive reflexes except one are integrated by the time the child completes his first birthday. Only one reflex, that is TLR backwards, tonic labyrinthine reflex backwards, you know, is the one that stays and gets integrated slowly by 3.5 years of age. So they're very important because they lay the basic they're kind of setting the stage there. And if you see beyond that, once the primitive reflexes are integrated, we have balance and equilibrium reactions. Now, why is this important? Because if the primitive reflexes haven't integrated, balance reactions would be poor, equilibrium reactions would be poor, fine motor coordination. And when I say fine motor coordination, I don't mean only fingers. When I say fine motors, I mean fingers, muscles around the mouth and muscles around my eyes, which help me to do the eye-hand coordination, as in the full, like where I'm scanning for things, looking for things. All of those functions become clumsier or they're not established, in kids. So that's why the integration of primitive reflexes is very important. So this is motor development, but the main feature that I would see in any child, that was a friend of mine ever since I was a child, was anxiety. I was anxious all the time as a child, and I thought that's how I am made, that's how I am. And everybody told me, oh, she's so stubborn, but I was not stubborn. I didn't know. My Moro was very strong, my Moro reflex. And later I got to know that I had a low birth weight when I was born. I had not cried immediately after birth, and my mom was stressed out all throughout her pregnancy. So, the kind of impact that it had on me was huge. And when I related it to myself, and when I started working using primitive reflexes, and now the studies prove and show that anxiety is a very, very, very common feature that you would see in all kids who have these primitive reflexes which are unintegrated. All right, any questions so far? Should I go ahead?
No questions so far.
Lovely. Maybe I'm making a lot of sense or not making any sense at all. All right. So now let's go to the next slide. Yeah. What are defensive reflexes? So we have, under primitive reflexes, we have defensive reflexes, we have postural reflexes, we have various reflexes. Why I want to talk about defensive reflexes is because these defensive reflexes lay the foundation for my or anybody's emotional development, So if there are two defensive reflexes. One is Moro reflex and the other is fear paralysis reflex. These are two defensive reflexes. If defensive reflexes are, the Moro or the fear paralysis reflex are present, even if it is in a weakened form, it will not let the child feel safe in his own body. That is one. So the interoceptive awareness or the state of being safe, the homeostasis is not achieved. So there's a lot of, a lot of things that will come along with Moro reflex that's present. So a lot of emotional fragile, the kids are emotionally fragile, a little thing happens and they're on the verge of a tantrum or a meltdown. That's because these reflexes are very strongly present. So fear paralysis reflex and Moro are two main ones. And why it's important to work on these two main ones is because, as I had mentioned, that in the fifth week of in the fifth week of conception is when this fear paralysis reflex starts emerging. So it's very important that I work right there, at the base level, if I have to work on with any child. When we know there's something called fight and flight, and freeze response. So the fight flight is Moro. Okay, that's what, if the Moro is present, the child would exhibit a stronger tendency towards a fight flight response. If the fear paralysis reflex is present, there'll be a more tendency towards, if FPR, fear paralysis, there'll be more of a freeze response that would be seen. Now, this is very important. When I see the picture on the left, it's up-regulated, which we very commonly call as hyperactivity or, whatever in kids. And the other one is down-regulated. So my system, anybody's nervous system should and usually is able to upregulate and downregulate and come back to a state of homeostasis. But when these reflexes are present, to achieve that homeostasis or to achieve that state of equilibrium is really difficult, very, very, very difficult. And when I talk about regulation, it is something that we see in behavior, but regulation is has so much to do with the sleep-wake cycle. Because if these reflexes are present, the child would have difficulty. There would be sleep challenges, falling asleep, and when the child is awake, to maintain the arousal levels throughout the day would be very difficult. So that's about the sleep-wake cycle. Eating and nourishing ourselves, so the rest digest system is also quite affected. So most of the kids affected, as in it's in imbalance basically. So when I see any child who has these primitive reflexes, especially the defensive reflexes, sleep challenges are very commonly seen. Ability to maintain the arousal levels, when I have to study, I have to focus. When I have to sleep, I have to, for our systems, it comes very automatically to, down regulate ourselves. But it's very difficult for a child or any individual who has these defensive reflexes present. So sleep-wake cycle, hunger-thirst cycle. So kids usually, most of the times, would have difficulty eating food or even tolerating food in their mouth, or even the sight of food gives them a very strong gag. I'm not saying that every time any child who has a eating issue would have these reflexes, but what I'm trying to convey is it's very important to check for those aspects so that we can also work on that. So please excuse me for my dog barking. I can't do anything about it. Okay. yeah, I'm sorry. So so what I'm trying to convey is putting the food, keeping the food in the mouth, the food pocketing would be seen, or the sight of food would give them a gag, because which is a survival response. Some foods would be tolerated. There would be difficulties with taste, temperature and smell, that kind of regulation. So those are the kinds of things that we would see. So so food, and then I told you sleep-wake cycle, and then the another one is the bowel and bladder. So regulating the bowels, like most parents tell me the child is constipated or the child goes to the toilet so many times in a day. The entire system is kind of dysregulated. And to stay in a body which is so dysregulated, then in that state to be able to regulate behaviors becomes really difficult for any individual. Yeah. So that's the slide. Let me go ahead. So as I mentioned, ability to shut down your system, it's very difficult. Sleep challenges are very common. Kids take like hours, to go off to sleep, or there is difficulty maintaining sleep. If the caregiver moves away, or if they don't have that touch, that security, they just wake up. So that simply means that the child or the individual finds it difficult to go to deeper levels of sleep. So the restful and restorative functions of the sleep are not achieved, what we would want actually. So that doesn't really happen, and that further impacts the activity levels of the child, So that's about the sleep thing. Eating and feeding, as I mentioned, is a regulatory function. We eat, we all have our there is this way that we associate sensory input, like as an occupational therapist, that's how I used to do. I'm sure you must be doing different, but I would like to bring this point so that you can see things differently, because it took me many years to get this perspective, and if you get it now, it would be awesome. If you're a young therapist there, the ones who are listening, or a parent. So I used to see eating challenges or sleep related challenges only from a perspective of sensory input. But it's very important to note that sensation and emotion are always go together. If I have had a good experience like eating, there's this dish that we eat in India, it's called pani puri. I love it, So if I eat that, I have this emotional, what you call affect to it, like, wow, it's so awesome. That's what I feel about it. But if I think of white pasta, which I don't like, I'm like, oh, So what I'm trying to tell you is every sensation is always paired up with the emotion along with it. So it's very important that's very important. And that's why, so I'll come to that slide later. I'll talk about that. I think I'll do that first. So what I want to mention is that the eating is affected, the sleep gets not affected, eating gets difficult, sleep gets difficult, the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So parasympathetic seems to calm down a system. Sympathetic is the one that's very important so that we can survive, So the balance is usually not achieved, and that's why we see a lot of behaviors that keep coming up in kids. Now, I would talk a lot about other reflexes, but I have realized, I used to work mainly with the vestibular input, proprioceptive input and tactile input. These were the three main systems that I used initially. Of course, smell was used once in a while and other inputs, but the role of the auditory intervention is a very, very, very big one, which I never in the initial years I did not kind of consider it. Give me a minute, please. So there are a lot of therapeutic modalities for auditory intervention. I'm trained in only two. One is therapeutic listening and the other is safe and sound protocol. There are many more available, but with just using these modalities, I have seen a vast shift in all of these, even in the way the primitive reflexes express themselves. So what I'm trying to emphasize through this slide is, of course, there are ways to integrate the primitive reflexes using either MNRI, that is Masgutova's neurosensory motor reflex integration techniques, rhythmic movement training. These are some of them in which I am trained, INPP protocol. So these are ways by which we work with the human body, as in, we're working with the body, we're working with the reflex. But the safe and sound protocol, the modulated musics, the quick shift albums in therapeutic listening help immensely to bring about the balance between the systems, and it helps the child to be able to do and participate in those functions and get the sleep, get the food and eating behaviors to kind of become more easy for the child. So I think auditory intervention is very, very, very important. Next very important thing is the breathing reflexes. There was a study and which explained that people who have chronic lung infections have the inhale exhale, the cyclical breathing that we have, the inhale exhale, that breathing for people who have chronic lung issues is altered. But for kids who are in the autism spectrum, it is 4 to 7 times more. The breathing reflexes are that very disturbed. There's a lot of shallow breathing. A lot of kids that we work with have upwardly tilted rib cage. That's another thing. So the lungs are not breathing enough, the diaphragm is not, like the breathing reflexes also need to be worked upon. So it's very, very important that we consider, while I work on primitive reflexes, I do consider the role of auditory interventions. Very important to consider the role of these breathing reflexes also. It's extremely important that I consider the role of the inner core, because if the child, most kids, I would say around 80% of the kids that I work with have, the inner core, as in there's difficulties with co-contraction. They have very, very poor, again, the poor core is also related. So what I'm trying to convey is all of these little factors also contribute to the presence of primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes are there so that they can help us to survive. And as the body develops and finds access to the resources within, then these reflexes start getting integrated. The point that I'm trying to make here is just working on integration of primitive reflexes, which I have done for a few years, alone did not help, you know. When I work on integration of primitive reflexes and I work on sensory integration and I work on breathing reflexes, I add up the auditory interventions, and when the child or the adult finds the safety within his body, most of the reflexes I see start getting integrated. So that's another important point that I wanted to make. So very important one point, that is called fear paralysis reflex. Okay, so this is one reflex that I want to really talk about, because this is very, 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 what I would say, present in 80 to 90% of the kids that I work with who are in the autism spectrum. Most kids, the common tendency that we would see is that the child withdraws and stays into his own bubble, is not able to, I won't say doesn't want to interact, instead it would be, it finds it difficult to participate or to be with others or to engage in activities, you know. That's because this reflex is present. So most of the symptoms that I would see when this fear paralysis is that the child would be introverted or the adult would be introverted. I have worked with a lot of adults. I have had the experience of working with a lot of high functioning adults who had this fear paralysis reflex present and who used, so they were very introverted and they used their intelligence and their grades, and they had higher posts in various hospitals or, you know, corporate jobs to what I would say cover, you know, they use those ranks as merits to cover their low self-esteem that they had. So fear paralysis reflex is a very, very strong reflex which is important. So in this, what I'm trying to show right now is how to integrate it. So give me a minute, I'm going to pause my share and I'm going to show you how we integrate this reflex. So I'm going to give you a very small little example here. Okay, so just a second, I'm going to open my channel and I'm going to open the video and show a very small little way of integrating it. All right, any questions so far while I'm opening? No questions? Okay, one second. Yeah. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. Do let me know when you are able to see it. In this particular video, I'm doing this integration of this fear, and I wouldn't say that I'm just using my son as a model here, you know, and I'm doing it on him. And it's a good idea to do it when the child is standing, if he can, or I can also do it in lying down. So here's the video and I'm going to share my screen. Oopsie, hold on. Yes. Okay. New share, your share. I think you can see my screen, right?
We can't see the video. It's still the fear paralysis reflex we're seeing.
Okay, I get that. So let me, oops, my screen share has stopped now, I think. So I'm going to share again and I'm going to share this screen that I want to show. Now what do you see?
Now we can see it. Yep.
So, you know, my son is standing in the front. What I would do to work on the fear paralysis reflex, and I would strongly recommend this, because, you know, especially if I would see that the child has sleep challenges, picky eating, not able to tolerate food, bowel issues, constipation, you know, child lost into his own world, not able to participate, has those repetitive patterns, you know, stuck in that freeze response. I usually do this and it helps. So what I'm doing is, and I always stand from behind, my hand is on the sternum. Yeah, so I have my hand, the left hand is steady and the right hand is on the top, and it goes with the rhythm like 1, 2, cha cha cha. And okay, before I go ahead, if you see, my son is blowing, and it's very important that when we work on this reflex, we ask the child to blow out. If the child can't blow out, I will blow out, you know. So if you see, I am also blowing out, and if the child can, I would go ha 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 ha. I just want to blow out basically. So this is what I'm doing. 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3. So that's what I did. So I first did the tapping at the sternum, 3 sets of 1 2 cha cha cha. That's the rhythm that I did. Then I'm going to trace and look for the insertion of the deltoid muscle on the lateral border, okay, and at that point what I do is 1 2 1 2 3, the child blows out 1 2 1 2 3, and again 1 2 1 2 3. So that's what we do. Now what I'm going to do is, that's the iliac crest, okay, so I am there, and then I check where is the bone, the hip joint, and then in the space between the two, that's where I do the tapping. So I'm going to go again with that same rhythm, which is going to be 1 2 cha cha cha. The child can keep the hands the way he had kept it over here. I'll show you again, hold on. I'm going to go back. Oh, 1 second, go back. I want to go back here. Okay, wait. So the child can just keep his hands like this. Just for the video, I had asked him to keep it on the side. So I do the same thing, 1 2 1 2 3. So that's what I do for the fear paralysis reflex. So that is one of the ways that I would start working on the fear paralysis reflex. So I'm going to share that same screen again, the first one that I had. My 1 minute. Yes. Can you see my screen again, the same slide?
We're back to the fear paralysis reflex.
Great. So this is what I would do basically when I would do the fear paralysis reflex. Now the other thing that I usually do is, 1 second, let me just make this big screen. Yeah. The other thing that I also do is what are called as pre-birth movements. So pre-birth movements are the movements that a baby does in the mother's womb. And when we do those movements, we simulate those movements outside the mother's womb. It really, as an outside of course, outside the mother's womb, but when we simulate it, we are giving the same stimulus to the brain, and it starts, you know, that I see a huge amount of difference with the kids, with their ability to be present and feel safe in their bodies. Kids usually calm down, some get disorganized initially, but there's a lot of change that we find when we do this particular movement pattern with our child. So I'll show you this also. I'm going to show you one pre-birth movement, okay. So, wait, hold on, escape and stop sharing. So I'm going to be putting my screen and I'm going to do the movement right now. And okay, I don't know if you can see me. I can see myself. So what I do usually is I put the thumbs inside, fingers closed, hands like this. Now this is my collarbone, my clavicle. So I'm under the clavicle, and when I do this, when the baby is in the mother's womb, the movements are really slowly because it's in the amniotic fluid, you know. So I do something like, the baby does what is called as crossover arms, okay. So it goes like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 and 14. So I do these movements really slowly while I am blowing out. I hold the child's hand and I do it on the child, and then I pause like how I have paused here. In this pause, I usually breathe in and out. It's a good idea to breathe in through the nose and out from the mouth, and I pause there for 2 breath cycles, and then again while breathing out I take 15 seconds and I come back to where I started. So I'm back very slowly to where I started. And then again there is this pause, and pause is extremely important. So I pause over here and I breathe in through my nose and out from my mouth, and then I do it on the other side. So I go like this very slowly, 15 seconds, and I come back over here. The slower we do, the more the impact on the child. And I usually ask parents to do these movements in a swimming pool if they have access to one, because it simulates the uterine environment, and I see huge gains, real big gains, if it's done in a water liquid environment basically. So now I'm pausing, and then I again come back very slowly, and I'm back to my original position. We do this only once, and it really helps immensely. I mean there are many pre-birth movements, and this I just wanted to give an introduction on what it is about. All right, so that was about the pre-birth movement. There's another one which we do, which is called as another pre-birth. I'll share a video on that. I'll show you how we do that. And that's, so what I did right now was crossover arms. Now what I do is what is called as crossover legs. It's similar. So I do it with the child's feet. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. Yeah. This one. Let me know if you can see my screen right now. Can you? You can?
Yes, we can see it. I also have a question for you. So one of the questions in the chat box was, can you explain the role of primitive reflexes in cases of speech?
It's a very big role, because there are so many primitive reflexes. One of the main reflexes would be this fear paralysis reflex, because if the child is in freeze, it's like, I don't know if you've had that experience, but when we are very scared, we want to shout, but our voice doesn't come out. I don't know if you've experienced that. You feel you're shouting, but there's no sound coming out. So what happens is, when we are stressed out, or when we are in this zone, the ability of the speech muscles, or rather they do not come online for kids, it's difficult for them to use speech for communication when they are stuck in this response. So one is fear paralysis, other is moro. They're very important to get integrated. Apart from that, Babkin reflex is one reflex which is very important. The palmar grasp, the first slide that we saw, is another important one. They are all, the foot reflexes, Babinski, foot tendon guard, they are all related, and if they are present, I've just worked on Babkin reflex, and I've seen better articulation, better speech. Kids say, parents say, the flow is coming, the child is able to speak so well now. So when these reflexes are retained, they definitely affect the communication, definitely. Yeah. That was the only question?
Yep, so far.
Okay. So this is the other one that I'm doing. The video that I'm showing is where I'm doing it on myself. Usually when I do this pre-birth movement, I would do it on the child, So the child lies down comfortably, and I just, lift up the leg, and I very slowly, see in the video it's going fast, I would take around 15 seconds to cross over, and if it's done in the watery environment, even better. It really helps. So I cross over, I pause, and then I go back to where I started from, and then I pause. When I saw these movements and when I went to learn them, I thought people were fooling me around. In fact, I've been blessed that I've learned primitive reflex integration from the pioneers, meaning I've had the experience of being with Moira Dempsey, being with Dr. Svetlana, meaning I've done so many courses, and some of these things, this is part of RMT, not MNRI, but what I'm saying is, initially I used to feel what these people talk about, this is such a, what is a child doing just crossing legs, how is that going to help? I had all those skeptic thoughts, and that skeptic self coming in me like, no, this is all bakwas. Bakwas is Hindi, this is all not going to work basically. But then I realized, no, when I saw the changes in the kids, it's huge, So that's one, and then I do it on the other side, So I first cross the right foot on the left, and then I do it on the other side. I pause, like, for like good 10. So I take 10-15 seconds to cross over, pause for 10 to 15 seconds and come back. So that's how we do the crossover arms, crossover legs. Okay, now I want to go back to my screen.
So Reena, there's another question. What happens if the reflexes do not get integrated? What are the implications?
Very good question. Then kids grow up with those and they end up feeling that they are not good enough. They have and a lot of things, I mean, if I tell you the kind of things that happened with me, and then I'll tell you what happened with kids, because I used to think, not understanding right and left, I used to always wear a bangle in my right hand, thinking, oh, the bangle hand is the right hand, so while driving, where is my bangle? Oh, this side. It was more of cognitive strategy that I was using, which any other person would just do naturally. Tags bothering you, that is a typical Moro response. Tags bothering you, tactile issues coming up. Moro is all about all sensory input, so my hair, hair touching the neck is irritating. So there would be tactile issues, auditory hypersensitivities, allergies, frequent infections, a lot of things. And that's how kids grow, they grow in kids and even adults. I worked with a lady last week. She was treated, she is a doctor, she is a medical doctor, and she came to me and she had all of this, what I just told you. She says, I can even, if my cook cooks food, I tell her this is a little raw, this is a little undone or whatever, because that is the sensitivity that she feels in her mouth, it's that strong. So food sensitivities, and she's been treated all this while for anxiety, whereas actually what she has, when I evaluated her, was a very strong Moro and FPR. She studied all these years so that, not to become a doctor, she tells me, so that it keeps them away from people. Because she says, if I would go to people, people would talk to me and I can't tolerate their sound. So it's better that I give them a reason, that I'm studying. So I'm in the house all alone. But now she says, once I've become a doctor, I have to go to the hospital and I can't go now. So she's on a break for 3 years and she was being treated for anxiety. So anxiety is what stays. Self-concept issues would come up. Sensory issues would continue to stay. I think life becomes very difficult, So those are some of the things that happens. I hope that helps you. Yeah, let's go ahead with the other part of the presentation. I'm just going to share my screen again. So I spoke about working on the pre-birth movements. Here's another one, the Moro reflex, and there are so many things that we can do for working and integrating on Moro reflex. This is one of the ways that I also work on it. This is from kinesiology, not from RMT or MNRI. What we do is we keep one finger on the belly button, if you can see. Hold on one second. Yeah. So I keep 2 fingers on the belly button, very gently, as much as I would, the pressure which I use while for putting my fingers on the belly button is as much as I would put on my eyeball. So very gently, and just an inch below is the other point, which is called triple warmer alarm point. When I hold on both of those points together till I get a pulse under those points, it helps kids to feel calmer. And it doesn't completely integrate the reflex, but it really helps in a big way to move ahead and to kind of get started. Because working on Moro, there are big disorganizations that would happen if you're not working under a trained person. So Moro and FPR are very strong reflexes, but this is a very gentle way to work on this reflex. This is another thing that I do very commonly. This is like a bolster swing. The child was holding on to the swing, and at the count of 3 the child falls backwards. Falling backward in space and going into that typical Moro response or the Moro state is what is very important, which would help again if the child is comfortable. So this is what I do. It's very important to use the vestibular system all the time as a backdrop while I'm working on primitive reflexes, because if I'm only doing primitive, in fact, RMT, that is rhythmic movement training, is all about rhythm. And if Bruce Perry talks about rhythm, There are rhythms in the mother's womb, so vestibular is the main sense that is very important if I want to work on the reflexes, the primitive reflexes. And tactile, so vestibular is important again, where I'm now in this video, what I'm actually doing is rolling. The rolling is a very important thing because it helps to develop the neck writing reactions. And if I develop the neck writing,
sorry to interrupt, ma'am. I cannot see the video. If I don't know if just me or it's everyone.
So I can see Reena is with the child with a ball on his belly. That's what I'm able to see.
Okay,
yes,
maybe
yes.
it's just me. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So when I've put the ball on the child's stomach, and the child is going ha, so I'm using breathing reflexes, and when the child is rolling, I am trying to work on head writing reflexes. So it's using vestibular, but I'm doing work on moving ahead and going towards the writing reflexes, because if the primitive reflexes are present, then writing and equilibrium reactions are also not able to get integrated, or rather not integrated, they're not able to get developed in the first place. Then this is tactile. Tactile is the main system. We use the tactile system, which is the main system that helps anybody to feel more calmer. It's a main system, not necessarily with a ball, even a touch, a hug, anything is okay, but that's the main system. And proprioception, I cannot emphasize the importance of being in the nature, because that also helps immensely when I'm talking about primitive reflexes again. So that's just an example. Climbing on trees. And now the power of co-regulation. So when I say this, what I'm trying to convey is, if I am doing the input, if I'm providing opportunities for input, or if I'm doing the exercises, but if I'm not co-regulating, I'm not attuning to what my child is feeling, what's the word for it? I need to be in touch with the emotional experience that the child is having. And if I'm not in touch with that emotional experience while I'm doing all of these exercises, it is useless, because I cannot separate the child's body and his emotion and his sensation. So it's very important that I am, I'm talking to the child about what he's feeling. Oh my God, you're having so much fun. Oh, I can see that in your eyes. Wow. If the child is crying, I'm like, oh God, that made you so sad. I notice your tears. Oh, I notice what's happening to your body. I talk such that the child gets and develops more body awareness, in that particular situation. And is my slide going ahead? Not going ahead. Yeah, the power of pause. Sometimes, at least I used to do this. Okay, this is one activity. Now what do I do? Okay, next. Okay, let's do this reflex. Okay, that done. Now let's do this. I used to jump from one to another and not give a pause to the child. I used to feel I have to do something. Doing. But it's very important that after I do some activity, I pause and I let the child integrate it in his or her own way. And I notice that in the child's behavior. I notice that in the child's hands. Are they like this tight? Are they like loose and relaxed? Is the child's body, completely in flexion? Is the child more open and showing approach behaviors? So I think in that pause, it's very important to give that pause, one, and not keep jumping, and there are so many reflexes that we want to work upon, but I can't do okay, now this, now this, now that, now this, now that. No, it won't help me. It's very important that I work on a reflex, but I am co-regulating and the child is co-regulating. I am calmer and I keep noticing what is the change that the child shows after this particular activity. So the pause is very, very, very important. So thank you so much, and these are the references that you can go through. Let me know if you have any questions for me.
This was so wonderful. I have learned so much. This is great, Reena. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for her? We have a bunch of thank yous coming in through the chat. One question, can we integrate play as a form of activity?
I feel play is the way by which I would do those exercises, you know. I can't be like, okay, let's do this exercise, okay, let's do this, you know. It's going to be like, let's have fun. If you saw that video where the photo where the child was on the bolster swing, and I'm like, do you think you can fall backwards? Come on, let's do it. 1 2 and zoom. Oh my god, you can do it. My god, I didn't know you would do it. So I would do all of that in the context of play. Nothing would be like, okay, now do this. Okay, done. Very good. That's good. You know, I'm not going to make it very monotonous. Definitely never.
Another question is, in pre-birth movement, whole body, should the body be in the water or only legs or hands?
So when I work with kids, the parent is in the swimming pool, you know, completely. So it's the entire body. But I feel, now this is what I have never done it, but I feel if I'm doing the leg pre-birth movements, only the legs can be in the water, because it's actually to simulate. If I'm doing the hand pre-birth, I can stand in the water and I can do the hand pre-birth. So in the liquidy environment, it really works very well. Very, very fast gains I get. Yeah.
Lots of more thank yous coming through as well. And you know what, if you have any questions that you think of after when I send out the recording, and Reena has allowed us to share her her PowerPoint slides, so I'll send those as well. You can always email me and I can forward on your questions that you have at a later time. So thank you so much. We are going to wrap up for today. This is really very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.